class today we're going to work on hyperbolas, which is the set of all points xy, the difference of whose distance from two distinct points called the foci are a positive constant. Okay, so a hyperbola has two branches. You can see one branch here, where you kind of have the vertex at the base, and here kind of at this relative max would be the other vertex of the other branch. So we have our two branches. We're going to label our vertices with a V. Our foci are going to be labeled with an F. And the foci are always inside the branch, very similar to how it was with parabolas. We're going to have the center. Our center is right here in the middle. And we're going to label our center with the letter Z for the center. And then we have our distances, our A, B, and C distances, just like we did with ellipses. From the center to a vertex is distance A, and from the center to the other vertex is also A. From the center to a focus point is C. From the center to the other focus point is also C. So the vertices are the 2 points where the line through the foci meet the hyperbola. So you have this line here going through the foci and the vertices and the center. The transverse axis is the line segment connecting the two vertices. So here the transverse axis is vertical and its length is 2a. You have a plus a, so its length is 2a. And the conjugate axis is the line segment through the center that's perpendicular to the transverse axis. So it would be perpendicular through the center here where my cursor is showing. The center is going to be the midpoint of the two vertices on the transverse axis. So we have two types of hyperbolas. We have it when the transverse axis is horizontal. You can see your focus are still on the inside of your two branches in the center there. Or when your transverse axis is vertical. Notice that I have everything labeled still. So if I continue on this graph when I do it horizontal, from the vertex to the center is A, and from the center to the focus is C, just like it was with ellipses. When the transverse axis is horizontal, this is the equation. Notice for a hyperbola, the difference is that it's a minus. When the transverse axis is vertical here, notice that the y variable comes first. You still have the minus. So when the transverse axis is horizontal, the x comes first. And when the transverse axis is vertical, the y comes first. And then it's subtraction. With ellipses, it didn't matter which came first since it's addition and it was commutative. But since subtraction is not commutative, we're going to look to see is the x a positive number and we're subtracting the y's? Or do we have a y's which is positive and we're subtracting the x's? You have subtraction for both of them and equaling 1. And we have our relationship to find the a's, b's, and c's, just like we did with our ellipses, except this time c squared is a squared plus b squared. So hyperbolas, it's a plus here, but ellipses, it was a minus here. It's the opposite sign. See, it's a negative sign for hyperbolas, and it's a plus sign in this relationship. It was the opposite for ellipses. So I marked up what A and C were, and I talked about the relationship to find B. So B is actually this distance along the conjugate axis. From the center to the endpoint of the conjugate axis is your B length, and this is your B length. So over when it's vertical, you can see that A is still the distance from the center to the vertex. B is the distance from the center to the end of the conjugate axis. And then C is from the center to the focus. Notice how there's this box drawn. We're going to use this box to help us draw in our slanted asymptotes here. so that we can draw in our branches. So to find the box, we're going to use our value of A, because it's going to be this entire length here of the transverse axis, which is 2A, and then the box is 2B wide, which is the length of the conjugate axis. So we're going to use our A and B values to draw the box so that we can draw our branches, and then we'll plot our focus. Let's do example 1. So we're given the equation. It's already in standard form, and we need to find all of the attributes. So first I'm going to identify. I see the x is coming first, and it says subtraction. When I see it's subtraction, I know it's a hyperbola. When the x comes first, that tells me that it's going to be horizontal. So when the transverse axis is horizontal, I know that my branches are open horizontally. So in order to do this, I need to find the center. So it's x minus h, y minus k. So the center is at 0, 0. So I can plot my center at 0, 0, and I'm going to label it with z for my center. So I have my a value is from underneath the x. So I know my a squared is 9, and I know that my b squared is 25. So I have that my a equals 3, and my b equals 5. With my a and b, I can draw my box. I know the axis that connects my vertices is going to be in the a direction. From the center, I go a to the vertices, and then I go b in the other direction. So I'm going to go a units, 1, 2, 3, and then that's where my vertex is. And then go 1, 2, 3, and plot my other vertex. So I have my 2 vertices now, and they are at 3 and minus 3. Then I'm going to go b units in the y direction, because it's under the y. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So at 5 and negative 5 are my b values. And this is how I'm going to draw my little box, my AB box, and we're going to use that to draw in the asymptotes and then the branches. So we're going to connect our endpoints or corners of our box with diagonals. So go ahead and do that now with a straight edge. Because you can see my asymptotes drawn in with dashed lines, and now I can draw my branches. So my branch goes from my focus, and it approaches your asymptotes. Approaches your asymptote. It shouldn't cross or touch your asymptote. So it's going to be curved, and it should look kind of like a C. And I named my vertices already that were at negative 3, 0, as well as 3, 0. So I'm going to list that off at plus or minus 3, 0. You can write it as 2 separate points, or you can do it together. Okay, the thing I need to do is find my foci. So my foci is C units away from the center. So I have my A in by B, so A squared is 9, and B squared is 25, so that equals my C squared. So C squared is 34, or C is the square root of 34, and that number is close to 36, so it's going to be a little less than 6. So I'm going to count a little less than 6, 4, 5, 6 to get to my foci here, and label it with an F, 3, 4, 5, and then 6, and I'm going to label my foci there. So those points are at, I started at 0, and I added root 34, and then I started at 0 and I subtracted root 34. So it's plus or minus root 34, 0. And I'm going to label those values, negative root 34 and a positive root 34. Lastly, we're going to write the equation of the asymptote. So it's a line. So first with this negative slope one, the slope is down 5, right 3. So it's down 5, right 3, plus 0 for my y-intercept. My second one, the positive slope one, goes up 5, right 3, with a y-intercept of 0. So it's 5 over 3x. So I can just write it as y equals plus or minus 5 over 3x, or you can write it as 2 Okay, that's example 1. So for the next one, we're going to find the standard form. So I grouped my y's and my x's. Notice the x's is negative, so I know the y's are going to come first. We always have to factor out our coefficient. So here I have a coefficient of -9, and here I have a coefficient of -1. So you have to factor the 9 out of everything having to do with the y's, and the -1 out of everything having to do with x. So let's do that. So here I factored my 9 out of my 2 terms and my -1 out of my 2 terms. So I'm going to continue completing the square. So I do y minus, I do half of -4, which is 2, and I'm going to square it and add it to both sides. Now I really added my 9 times my 4. So over here I need to add 36 because that's 9 times 4. So I'm going to add 36. Let's do the second one. So I have this -1 I'm bringing down. X, I take half of my 6, which is +3. Oops, forgot my squared. I'm going to square it and add 9. So on this side, it's 9 times -1. So we have to make sure we get that -1 there. So 9 times -1 on the other side, which becomes -9. So I'm going to add all those numbers together, and I get a +9. So now, to do standard form, you have to set it equal to 1. So I have to divide every single term by 9, because I want it to equal 1 on the right-hand side. So my 9's are canceling here. So I'm left with y minus 2 squared over 1 minus x plus 3 squared over 9, nothing canceled, equals 1. So now I have my standard form equation, and I can see that the y is coming first, so I can use that information to graph it. So I wrote down the standard form equation when the y comes first. Notice the h is next to the x coordinate and the k is next to the y coordinate. So it's -3, +2. So I can plot -3, +2 for my center. And I'm going to label that as z. My a squared is under the y, so my a squared is 1. So my a equals 1. And my b squared is 9, so I know that b equals 3. So I can use those to draw my box now. So from the center at -3, 2, since the transverse axis is vertical, I'm going to go vertically in the a direction to get to my vertex. So I'm going to go 1 unit from my center to my vertex. And I'm going to go down 1 unit to my other vertex. And then I'm going to go b units in the x direction. And I'm going to make my AB box. And it's this small little box here. And this is what I'm going to use to draw in my asymptotes through the corner. So go ahead and do that. So I drew in my asymptotes with my yellow dashed line, and then I drew in my branches that went to the vertices and approached my asymptotes in either direction. So now what I need to do is I need to plot my foci. So to plot my foci, I'm going to use the relationship that a squared plus b squared is c squared. So my a squared is 1 and my b squared is 9, so that equals my c squared. So my c is square root 10, which is a little bigger than 9, so it's a little more than 3. So I'm going to go a little more than 3 from my center. 1, 2, 3, and then some more, and label that with an F. And then from my center, I'm going to go down 1, 2, 3, and a little bit more to do my foci. 1, 2, 3, and a little bit more. So you start at your center and you go C units in either direction to get to your foci. And we're going to label our points. So our foci, to get to there, we started at our center, which was at x coordinate of -3, and then the y coordinate was up 2, and I added from 2 square root 10, and then I went up to 2 and I subtracted square root 10. It's plus or minus square root 10. So this number here was 2 plus square root 10, and the number here is 2 minus square root 10. Okay, and that's how you graph a standard form equation.